I died on a Tuesday. The concrete was cold beneath my back. Blood pooled around my head. Warm, then cooling fast. Somewhere above me, heels clicked away. They didn't hurry. I knew those heels. I had bought her those shoes. Rose perfume drifted down through the dark. Sweet. Cloying. It was the last thing I smelled. There was one thing I never understood that night. I'll get to that later. Then light. Too bright. A ceiling fan turned slow circles above a narrow bed. My hands looked smaller. Softer. Unscarred. I was 16 again. 11 years before the fall, I sat up fast. My heart slammed against my ribs. It didn't believe this was real either. The room smelled like fabric softener and cheap candles. Not blood, not concrete. Not roses. I had been given something no one gets twice. A second look at the people who destroyed me. This time, I intended to use it. My name is Marlo Hale. In my past life, I built a company from nothing. I handed my throne to the wrong person. This time, I would hand her something else entirely. Downstairs, a door slammed. Perfume drifted up the stairwell, faint but unmistakable. Roses. My stomach turned before my mind caught up. Vivian was home. Marlo, get down here, she called. Her voice was bright as broken glass. I need you to iron my blouse for tonight. I went down slowly. I studied her like a stranger might. In a sense, she was Vivian Croft. My stepsister. 17 years old. Golden-haired. Cruelty wrapped in a cheerleader's smile. In my past life, she smiled at my funeral too. Did you hear me? She said. She didn't look up from her phone. I heard you, I said. She glanced at me then. Something flickered behind her eyes. Not recognition. Just mild surprise that I hadn't flinched. I filed that away. She would learn to read my calm as weakness. That mistake would cost her everything. That night I lay awake. I mapped the years ahead. In my past life, Vivian married a man named Julian Voss. We were 26. He seemed golden too. Old money. Easy smile. Sandalwood cologne that used to make women swoon. He wasn't golden. He was a front for a loan shark named Dominic Reyes. He laundered dirty money through a fake investment fund. When it collapsed, so did Vivian, so did I. By then she'd stolen my business. My name was tied to hers. This time, I would let her have him early. I would hand him over myself. The plan sounds simple when I say it that way. It wasn't. There were pieces I needed first. A lawyer who wouldn't be bought. A friend from my old life who owed me a debt. She didn't remember it yet. A paper trail I needed to start building. Years before anyone thought to look. I made one phone call the next morning. Just one. To a number I had memorized. A number from a life that hadn't happened yet. Hale and Associates, a woman answered. I need to speak with Grace Kim, I said. Tell her it's about the Reyes case. She'll know what that means in a few years. There was a pause. Ma'am, there's no Reyes case on file. There will be, I said, and hung up. I was 16. I had no money. No proof. No way to explain how I knew what I knew. All I had was time. I intended to spend every hour of it. Vivian's cruelty started small, the way it always does. That first week back, she took my class notes off my desk while I was in the bathroom. She copied the whole essay word for word. 2 days later, our teacher praised it in front of the class. I sat through the praise with my hands flat on the desk. I said nothing. I let it go. The second cut came a week after that. Warren caught me climbing back through my window at midnight. I hadn't actually snuck out. Vivian had told him I did, 3 nights running, and he finally waited up to catch me. He took my phone for 2 weeks. He never asked me a single question first. Somewhere behind my ribs, something cold and patient kept count. Our stepfather, Warren Croft, never noticed the pattern. He worked long hours at his firm downtown. He came home smelling of stale coffee and printer toner. He handed out affection the way he handed out bonuses, unevenly. Only to whoever performed best that quarter. Vivian performed. I simply endured. Your sister got the lead in the spring recital, he told me one night. He didn't look up from his newspaper. Maybe you should ask her for pointers. Stepsister, I said quietly. He turned a page like I hadn't spoken at all. That was the shape of my childhood. Corrections, nobody heard. Small cruelties, nobody clocked. A house that ran on Vivian's comfort. And my silence. I didn't need him to notice. I needed him to stay exactly where he was. Comfortable and unbothered. Until the year his approval would matter for an entirely different reason. The third cruelty came a month later. Vivian told the whole cafeteria I'd been caught cheating on a math test. A lie built from nothing but her own boredom. Girls I barely knew stared at me across the lunchroom. They whispered behind cupped hands. The room smelled like reheated pizza and floor cleaner. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like trapped flies. You could at least deny it, my one real friend, Priya, muttered beside me. Why bother, I said. She'll say something worse next month anyway. Priya frowned but didn't argue. She didn't know I was counting, not complaining. Every lie Vivian told was a stone. I set it aside for a wall I hadn't finished building. That night I wrote down a list. I hid a notebook under a loose floorboard. Names, dates, small humiliations. Nothing that meant anything yet. In another 11 years, some of those names would matter more than Vivian could ever imagine. I finished high school on a scholarship. Vivian called it cute. That fall I took a part-time job folding sweaters at a mall kiosk. 2 months later I took a second job, answering phones for a claims office. By spring I'd added a third, stocking shelves overnight. The first 2 didn't cover rent alone. I slept 4 hours a night for most of 2 years. I remember every one of them. Every spare dollar went somewhere Vivian never saw. I opened a private savings account under my own name. I paid a lawyer named Grace Kim a small retainer, in installments so small she almost didn't take the case seriously. Every few weeks I brought her another folder. Bank statements I'd requested. Public records I'd pulled. A timeline I kept rewriting by hand. I spent 2 full years feeding her documents like that. 1 folder at a time. Long before the crime behind them had even happened. You understand this is unusual, Grace said, the first time we met in person. Her office smelled like leather chairs and old coffee. A clock ticked somewhere behind her desk. Too loud in the quiet. I understand, I said. You're asking me to build a file on a man who hasn't broken any laws yet. He will, I said. And when he does, I want the file already 3 years deep. She studied me a long moment. Whatever she saw made her nod instead of argue. That was the first domino. It would take 9 more years to reach the last one. At 19, I left the mall kiosk behind. I took an unpaid internship at a small branding agency. I sketched logos late into the night, after my paying shifts ended. At 22, I'd saved enough to rent a corner of a shared studio above a laundromat. I split the rent with 2 other freelancers. At 24, both of them moved on. The studio became mine alone, 1 client at a time. By 25, I owned that small design studio outright. Nothing glamorous, but mine. Vivian, meanwhile, had drifted through 3 failed businesses. All funded by our stepfather. She blamed everyone but herself for each one. She still wore roses. She still smiled the same broken glass smile. She had gotten better at hiding the cruelty under charm, that only made it sharper when it finally came out. Then Julian Voss walked into my studio on a Thursday in March. He smelled like sandalwood and money. His watch caught the light when he shook my hand. Everything about him was built to be believed. I hear you're the best in the city for boutique branding, he said. He smiled with all his teeth. I've heard that too, I said. He laughed like I'd said something clever. In my past life, that laugh used to charm me. This time, it just sounded like a door creaking on a house already on fire. I could have told him no. I could have sent him anywhere else. Instead, I said yes to the meeting. Meetings were where the seeds got planted. I needed Vivian to meet him, precisely the way she was about to. That was the small hook waiting at the edge of everything. I already knew what Julian was. I already knew what he'd do to whoever loved him. The question was never whether the trap would spring. The question was only how loudly it would break. That same week, Warren gathered us both for dinner. It was the kind of forced ritual he performed twice a year. Out of guilt rather than love. The dining room smelled like roast chicken and candle wax. Silverware clinked too loud in the quiet. "I'm restructuring my will," he announced between bites. He didn't look at either of us directly. "The house goes to Vivian when I'm gone. Marlo, you'll get a modest sum. Nothing extravagant. You've always managed on your own well enough." Vivian smiled into her wine glass. She didn't bother to hide her satisfaction. I felt the old wound flare, dull and familiar. Then it faded just as fast. In my past life, this decision had broken something in me. This time it barely registered. I had bigger fires to set than a house I'd never wanted. "That's fair," I said. Warren blinked. He'd clearly expected an argument. "You're not upset?" "Why would I be?" I said. "It's your house. Your choice." He studied me a moment, confused by the absence of a fight. Then he went back to his chicken, already forgetting the conversation. Vivian wasn't as easily satisfied. "You're being strange," she said later. She cornered me by the sink while Warren watched television in the next room. "You used to cry over things like this." "People change," I said. "Not you," she said. Something almost uneasy flickered behind her eyes. "You've been different since 16. Colder. It's unsettling." "Good," I said. I left her standing there with a dish towel in her hand. No comeback ready. 6 months later, Warren's health began to slip. Nothing dramatic. Just a slow tightening around his heart. His doctor gave him 3 years, if he was careful. I heard the timeline and understood exactly how it would shape the ending. Every plan I built after that dinner ran against that same silent clock. I invited Vivian to the studio's launch party 2 weeks later. She came for the free champagne. She stayed for the man in the tailored grey suit, standing near the window. Sandalwood cologne cut through the room like a blade. "Who is that?" she asked. She wasn't really asking me. She was asking the universe to hand him over. "A client," I said. "Julian Voss." Her eyes lit up the way a fox's eyes light up near a henhouse. "Introduce me." I could have said no. I said, "Sure," and watched her cross the room. Like she was walking into her own coronation. She had no idea she was walking into mine. Within a month they were inseparable. Within 3, he'd proposed. The ring could have paid my rent for a decade. Vivian wore it everywhere. She held her hand up under every light. She made sure the whole world saw the diamond. None of us saw the debt buried under it. "You're not even a little jealous?" she asked one night. She twisted the ring under the kitchen light, like she was polishing a trophy. "Not even a little," I said. I meant it more than she could understand. "I always knew you'd end up alone," she said, sweet as poison. "Some people just aren't built for being loved." I let that sit in the air between us, unanswered. Some insults deserve silence more than a comeback. Hers deserved patience. Patience was the blade I was sharpening. That night, I made a second call. This time to a private investigator named Ruth Okafor. A woman my old life had trusted with worse secrets than this one. "I need everything on Julian Voss," I said. "His finances, his associates, every account with his name on it." "That's expensive work," she said. "I've been saving for 11 years, I said. "Start tomorrow." She didn't ask why. A woman with no obvious connection to Voss, wanting him investigated this thoroughly. Some people just know better than to ask. Ruth was one of them. She'd learn the answer soon enough, along with everyone else. My studio sat above a laundromat. 2 cramped rooms that smelled like fabric softener and fresh-cut paper. I liked it more than any office I'd owned in my past life. Priya still worked with me by then. The only person who'd stayed constant across both lives, though she didn't know that. She brought coffee every morning in a chipped ceramic mug. Always the same one. Always black. "You look tired," she said one morning. She set the mug on my desk. "You've looked tired for years, actually." "I sleep fine," I said. "You work like someone running from something," she said. "Or towards something." "I can never tell which." "Both," I said, and left it there. Some truths weren't hers to carry yet. That evening, I met a man named Oscar at the laundromat downstairs. He folded towels with the patient rhythm of someone who'd learned not to hurry. He asked about my day. I told him it was ordinary, which was mostly true. We talked for 20 minutes about nothing important. It felt like sunlight after years spent underground. He smelled like laundry detergent and clean cotton. Nothing like sandalwood. Nothing like roses. His hands were rough from years of manual work. Calloused in a way that felt honest, not dangerous. When he laughed, it came from somewhere real. Not performed for an audience, the way Vivian's laugh always was. "You always look like you're solving a math problem," he said. He folded a towel into a neat, careful square. "Something like that," I said. "Must be a big one," he said, "if it takes this long to work out." "The biggest one I've ever had," I said. "Some math problems take 11 years to solve. Not everyone needs to see the equation to appreciate the answer." I didn't tell him about Vivian. I didn't tell him about the notebook under my old floorboard. Or the retainer with Grace Kim. Or the private investigator, quietly building a file 3 states away. Some parts of my life belonged only to the fire I was building, not to the warmth I was trying to keep separate from it. Vivian, meanwhile, had graduated from small cruelties to public ones. At Warren's birthday dinner that spring, she told the assembled relatives I'd never really amounted to much, loud enough for the whole table to hear, sweet enough that anyone who objected would look petty for noticing the knife inside it. "She means well," Warren said afterward. He always excused her. "Of course she does," I said. I smiled the same smile I'd learned from watching her for 11 years. Bright on the surface. Empty underneath. Vivian moved into Julian's penthouse a week before the wedding. Marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows. A chandelier that scattered light like scattered promises. She called me from the balcony to gloat. Her voice was bright with champagne and cruelty. "You should see this place, Marlowe. You should see what you missed out on." "I'm sure it's beautiful," I said. "It is," she said. "Everything about my life is beautiful now. Everything about yours is exactly the same as always." I looked around my small apartment. Second-hand couch. Chipped mug. A single lamp throwing warm light across worn floorboards. It smelled like fresh coffee and rain through a cracked window. It was mine. Nothing in it was borrowed from anyone's ruin. "Enjoy the view," I said, and hung up before she could hear the smile in my voice. 3 days later, Ruth called back. Her voice was low and careful. "You were right to worry," she said. "Voss isn't just rich. He's a front. There's a man named Dominic Reyes moving money through his accounts. Bad money. The kind that kills people who ask questions." Something in my chest went very still and very cold. Not fear. Recognition. The past finally rhyming with the present. The way I'd always known it would. "Send me everything," I said. "Every account number. Every wire transfer. Every name." "There's something else," Ruth said. "Voss has a partner nobody talks about publicly. A woman who used to run his books, before Reyes took over. She disappeared 2 years ago. I think she's still alive. I think she wants to talk." That was a piece I hadn't expected. Not from my first life. A crack in the wall I hadn't known existed. It would matter later, more than I could yet imagine. "Find her," I said. Carefully. For a while, nothing happened. That was the hardest part. Waiting. Vivian paraded her diamond and her marble floors. Julian's cologne filled every room he entered. The wedding invitations went out in gold foil script. I waited while the woman I hated most in the world believed she'd finally won. I kept working. I kept saving. I kept feeding Grace Kim documents, one folder at a time. I was building a case as quiet and patient as a spider. A web nobody notices until they're already caught in it. The wedding was set for June. In a garden dripping with white roses. Of course it was roses. Vivian had always loved the smell that made my stomach turn. She had no idea why it did. I intended to make sure she never got the chance to ask. 2 weeks before the ceremony, Ruth found the woman who used to run Voss's books. Her name was Delia Marsh. We met in a diner that smelled like burnt coffee and fryer oil. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. "You want to know about Julian," she said. Her hands wrapped around a mug she never drank from. "I want to know everything," I said. "He's not the dangerous one," she said. "Reyes is. Julian just signs where he's told to sign. But if Reyes thinks the operation is exposed, he burns it down. Everyone in it, including whoever's wearing that man's ring." The words landed exactly where I needed them to. Not a warning, a blueprint. "When's the wedding?" Delia asked. 3 weeks, I said. She looked at me a long moment. Something like pity crossed her face. "Does she know what she's marrying?" "No," I said. "She never does." That wasn't quite true. Vivian knew exactly what she was marrying. Money, status, a diamond big enough to blind the neighbors. She'd never once asked where any of it came from. Some people don't ask questions. Deep down they already suspect the answer. They've decided it doesn't matter, as long as the check clears. I met with Grace Kim again that week. Her office was thick with the smell of leather and burnt coffee. The clock behind her desk ticked louder than I remembered. "The file's ready," she said. "Wire transfers, shell accounts, 3 witnesses willing to testify. This isn't speculation anymore, Marlowe. This is a case." "Not yet," I said. "We wait until the wedding." Her eyebrows rose. "You want to wait until she marries him?" "I want the fall to matter," I said. "If we move now, it's a scandal. If we move after, it's a collapse." Grace studied me the way people study something they're not sure they should be afraid of. "You've been planning this a long time. Longer than you know," I said. She didn't push. Some people know better than to ask a closed door to open before it's ready. Grace had learned that lesson once, long before I walked into her office. I intended to make sure she never had to learn it again on my account. "There's risk in waiting," Grace said finally. She closed the file on her desk. "Reyes isn't stupid. If he smells trouble before the wedding, he could move the money somewhere we can't reach it." "He won't smell anything," I said. "Julian doesn't know enough to be careful. Reyes trusts Julian's carelessness more than his own instincts. That's the whole reason this works." "You're gambling on a dead man's ego," Grace said. "I'm gambling on 11 years of watching exactly how that ego behaves," I said. "It hasn't failed me yet." She exhaled. Some of the tension left her shoulders, though not all of it. "Fine," she said. "We wait for the wedding. But the moment the ceremony ends, we move like the building's on fire." "That," I said, "is precisely the plan." I should mention the sound that started following me that spring. Heels on marble, sharp and unhurried. The same rhythm I'd heard walking away from me the night I died. Every time Vivian crossed a hard floor in her new heels, my whole body went still. Half a second, then I'd remember. I wasn't bleeding out on concrete anymore. I never told anyone why. Some things you carry alone. At least until the moment you don't have to. The invitations arrived in gold foil. Heavy cardstock, rose gold ribbon, tied in a bow too perfect to be anything but rehearsed. Vivian handed me mine personally, savoring it. She watched my face for a crack that never came. "You'll come, won't you?" she said. "I want you there. I want you to see it." "I wouldn't miss it," I said, and meant every word. Though not for any reason she could have guessed. That night I sat at my kitchen table with the invitation in front of me. Rose gold ribbon catching the lamplight. I thought about the woman who used to be me, the one who bled out on cold concrete, while these same heels walked away unhurried. I thought about how long I'd waited to be the one holding still, while someone else's world came apart. Somewhere, across the city, Julian Voss was signing another document he didn't understand. Dominic Reyes was moving money through accounts that would soon have my lawyer's fingerprints all over them. Vivian was trying on a wedding dress white as bone. Utterly certain she had won. She had no idea I was watching. She had no idea how long I'd been watching, or how much closer the wedding was bringing her to the ending I'd built for her. One quiet phone call at a time. The bridal shower happened 10 days before the ceremony. Hosted in a private room that smelled of lilies and champagne. Vivian sat at the head of the table like a queen accepting tribute. She unwrapped gifts with theatrical delight, roses pinned in her hair for the occasion. Because roses were always the occasion. "Open mine last," she told the room. She produced a small box wrapped in gold paper. Inside was a bracelet, cheap and gaudy. Clearly meant as a joke rather than a gift. "For Marlowe," she announced to the table, "since she'll need something sparkly if she ever wants a ring of her own." The room laughed, the polite, uncomfortable laugh of people watching cruelty dressed as humor. I turned the bracelet over once in my palm, metal cold and thin against my skin. I set it down without putting it on. "Thank you," I said. "It's very you." Something flickered across her face. She couldn't tell if that had been an insult or a compliment. The not knowing bothered her more than an argument would have. Good. Let her sit with that itch a while longer. Later, in the ladies' room, she cornered me at the mirror. Champagne had loosened whatever restraint she had left. "You used to fight back," she said. She studied my reflection instead of my face. "Now you just take it. It's almost boring." "I'm saving my energy," I said, "for something more interesting." She laughed, sharp and confused, unable to read the warning under the words. She touched up her lipstick, rose red to match the perfume. She swept back out to the party without another glance. She had no idea that it would become the last calm moment of her entire life. The wedding morning came bright and merciless. Sunlight poured through white curtains like something out of a magazine. Roses everywhere. Roses on the arbor, roses in Vivian's hair, roses stitched into the hem of her gown. The smell hit me the moment I walked into the garden. Sweet, thick, suffocating. My stomach turned before I could stop it. I found a seat near the back. Grace Kim sat 2 rows behind me, dressed like any other guest. Her phone was already recording audio from a jacket pocket. No one noticed. Ruth Okafor stood near the catering tent, badge hidden, eyes sharp. Delia Marsh hadn't come. She'd asked me not to make her watch. Julian looked handsome in his tailored suit. Sandalwood cologne drifted over the roses, like oil over water. He smiled at Vivian like a man who believed his own lie completely. Maybe he did. Some liars are the last to know. "You may kiss the bride," the officiant said. The crowd applauded. Champagne corks popped somewhere behind me. Vivian caught my eye across the aisle and smiled. The same broken glass smile she'd worn since we were teenagers. Except now it was aimed at everyone in the garden. Like a trophy she'd finally earned. She had no idea I was watching for a different reason than everyone else. 3 days after the wedding, the first crack appeared. A wire transfer bounced. $50,000, meant for a shell account in the Caymans. Flagged and frozen overnight. Julian didn't know why. Neither did Vivian. I did. Grace had filed the paperwork a week earlier, quiet as breath. Routed through a compliance officer who owed her a favor from another life. Some banking error, Julian told Vivian over dinner. Ruth's contact overheard it through the penthouse's paper-thin walls. "It'll sort itself out." It would not sort itself out. Nothing I built ever did. Not for people like him. The frozen wire was only the first domino. I'd chosen it carefully. Grace had spent months tracing the shell accounts Julian used to move Reyes' money. She quietly reported each one to the appropriate regulators. As soon as enough documentation existed to make the report stick. One by one, Banks began flagging transactions that used to move through without a second glance. I sat with Grace in her office one evening. I watched her lay out 3 folders like a surgeon laying out instruments. "This one freezes his personal checking account," she said. She tapped the first folder. "This one triggers an IRS review on the fund's tax filings." She tapped the third. "This one goes to his malpractice insurer. It tells them he may be a knowing participant in fraud. That voids his coverage the moment they confirm it." "How long before he notices all 3? I asked. "If we stagger them right, weeks," she said. "Long enough he can't trace them to a single source. Long enough it looks like the whole structure is failing under its own weight." That was exactly the design. Not one blow, loud and traceable. 100 small cuts, arriving from every direction at once. Until the wound looked less like an attack, more like inevitable collapse. Ray's whole operation depended on looking untouchable. I intended to make it look fragile instead. One quiet filing at a time. I kept working my job during the day. I kept ironing my own blouses. I kept living the quiet, ordinary life Vivian loved to mock. At night, I met Grace in her office. The leather chairs creaking, the clock ticking too loud. Papers passing between us, like cards in a game only I understood. "Reyes is getting nervous," Grace said one night in July. "He's asking Julian where the missing money went." "Good," I said. "Good," she repeated. "Marlowe, a man like Reyes doesn't get nervous quietly. People around him start disappearing. Then we move faster," I said. "Not slower." Walking home that night, a woman passed me on the sidewalk. She wore rose perfume, thick and sweet in the summer air. For half a second, the street disappeared. Concrete under my back. Blood pooling warm, then cooling. Heels clicking away, unhurried, into the dark. I gripped the railing of a nearby stoop. I waited until the world settled back into place. Street lights, car horns, the ordinary hum of a city. A city that didn't know it was carrying a ghost through it. My hands were shaking. I hated that they were shaking. I breathed until they stopped. My phone rang before I'd fully caught my breath. An unfamiliar number. No caller ID. "Is this Marlowe Hale?" a man's voice asked. It was low and careful. "Who's asking?" "Someone who used to work for Dominic Reyes," he said. "I heard you're building a file. I have things in it you don't have yet." Every instinct I owned went sharp and still at once. "Why would you help me?" "Because Reyes had my brother killed for asking the wrong questions," the man said. "I've been waiting 3 years for someone to finally come asking the right ones." I didn't recognize the voice. I hadn't planned for this man. I hadn't known he existed, in my past life or this one. It was the first piece of the puzzle that had arrived entirely on its own. Uninvited. It would matter more than almost anything else I'd built by hand. "Send me what you have," I said. "Somewhere safe." He gave me an address for a dead drop, behind a shuttered bookstore. Then he hung up before I could ask his name. I stood on that sidewalk a long moment, rose perfume long gone from the air, heart still hammering from 2 different kinds of fear, layered on top of each other. I went the next night, alone. The alley behind the bookstore was thick with the smell of wet cardboard and old dumpster grease. A single flickering street lamp threw uneven light across cracked pavement. Somewhere a cat knocked over a bottle. Glass rolled and settled with a hollow clink. My whole body went rigid for a second. The package sat wedged behind a loose brick. Wrapped in a plastic grocery bag, gone soft with damp. Inside were photographs, a flash drive, and a handwritten ledger in cramped, careful print. Dates, amounts, names I recognized from Ruth's file. 3 I didn't. My hands were steady this time. Some fears can be outworked by purpose. I brought everything to Grace's office 2 days later. The room smelled the same as always. Leather and old coffee. The clock behind her desk ticked with its familiar, patient rhythm. "This changes the timeline," Grace said. She turned pages slowly, her expression unreadable. "This ledger connects Reyes directly to a homicide. If this is real, we're not looking at fraud charges anymore. We're looking at conspiracy. Is it real? I asked. I'll have it authenticated, she said. But my gut says yes. Where did you get this? Someone who wanted the same thing I want, I said. She studied me a long moment, the way she always did when I gave her half an answer instead of a whole one. You've built something here most people spend a career chasing, she said. I hope you know what you're going to do with it. I know exactly what I'm going to do with it, I said. I've known for 11 years. She studied me across the desk. The same look she'd given me years earlier. Back when I was a stranger, asking her to build a file on a crime that hadn't happened yet. You're not doing this for justice, she said. You're doing this because you want to watch it happen. I'm doing this, I said, because I already watched it happen once, from the wrong side. That same week, while Grace filed her quiet paperwork, Vivian posted photographs online. From a yacht in the Mediterranean, champagne glasses raised against a sunset that looked almost too perfect to be real. Comments poured in, admiring her dress, her tan, her impossibly charmed life. She replied to everyone, glowing under the attention like it was oxygen. I saw the photographs from my studio. My laptop sat on a desk that still smelled faintly of sawdust. From a shelf Oscar had helped me build the weekend before. There was no yacht in my life, no Mediterranean sunset. Just a warm mug of coffee, Priya humming off-key in the next room. And a quiet certainty settling into my chest. It felt sturdier than anything gold could buy. For a moment, watching her curated joy against my ordinary evening, something small and human in me ached. Not envy exactly. More like grief. Grief for the years I'd spent believing that gold-plated life meant anything at all. Then I closed the laptop. The ache passed the way weather passes. I went back to folding laundry with hands that had never once shaken from someone else's cruelty. She didn't ask what that meant. Some doors are better left unopened. Even for lawyers who've seen almost everything. Vivian called me 2 weeks later. Her voice was tight in a way I'd never heard before. Marlo, I need you to come over. I went. The penthouse smelled different than I remembered. Less like money, more like fear sweated into expensive fabric. Vivian sat on the marble floor in a silk robe, mascara smudged under her eyes, diamond ring catching the light with none of its old triumph. Something's wrong, she said. The accounts. Julian won't tell me anything. There were men here yesterday, men I didn't recognize. That sounds stressful, I said, and let the silence stretch. You don't understand, she said. Her voice cracked. One of them touched my arm. He told me to make sure my husband remembered what he owed. What does that mean, Marlo? What did I marry into? I looked at her a long moment. I let the question hang in the too bright room. Some truths are gifts you save for the exact right hour. This wasn't it yet. I don't know, I said. But I'm sure it'll be fine. She believed me. She'd never once considered that I might be the reason it wouldn't be. Julian found me alone in the penthouse kitchen before I left that night. He was pouring himself a whiskey, hands not quite steady. Up close, his sandalwood cologne had turned sour, mixed with something like fear sweating through his collar. You're Vivian's sister, he said. You run some kind of design business. Studio, I said. Small one. You seem sharp, he said. He studied me a beat too long. Sharper than most people give you credit for, I'd guess. People underestimate quiet a lot, I said. He laughed, short and humorless. Then he leaned against the counter, like the weight of the day had finally caught up to his spine. If you ever hear anything, he said, voice dropping low, anything about accounts, about men asking questions, you'd tell Vivian, wouldn't you? Of course, I said. I watched something in his shoulders ease, wrongly, at the lie. He had no idea I already knew every account number he was afraid of. He had no idea the men asking questions worked for a lawyer. A lawyer I'd hired a decade before he ever proposed. I finished my water and set the glass down without a sound. I left him standing in his own kitchen. Already 3 moves behind a game he didn't know he was playing. That night, driving home, my phone buzzed with a message from Ruth. Reyes moved $12 million through Julian's fund last quarter. Feds were already circling 2 other accounts tied to him. Our filing just gave them a third. I didn't answer right away. I sat in my car outside my apartment, engine ticking as it cooled. I let myself feel something close to satisfaction for the first time in 11 years. It didn't feel like joy. It felt like a debt finally coming due. The second blow landed a month later, and it landed in public. That was exactly how I'd designed it. Vivian had insisted on hosting Julian's biggest client dinner at their penthouse. Chandeliers blazing, string quartet in the corner. Roses on every table, because roses were always the answer for her. Grace's associate arrived posing as a caterer's assistant. She slipped a manila envelope onto the desk in Julian's study. Exactly 40 minutes before dessert. Inside were copies of 3 wire transfers with Reyes' name attached. Also a cease and desist letter from Grace's firm. And a note that read simply, "The SEC has these too." Julian found the envelope during a toast. I watched his face go the color of old paper. He excused himself, then didn't come back for 20 minutes. When he returned, his hands weren't steady. His cologne, usually so sharp, so confident, smelled sour under a thin sheen of sweat. "Everything all right, darling?" Vivian asked. Roses in her hair caught the chandelier light. "Fine," he said. "Business." It wasn't fine. 3 of his biggest clients left before dessert was served. Phones already out. Calling their own lawyers before they'd even reached the elevator. I watched from across the room, champagne untouched in my hand, and said nothing at all. She had no idea I'd sent that envelope. She had no idea the caterer's assistant worked for a lawyer I'd been paying for 11 years. All she knew was that her perfect dinner had cracked down the middle. She didn't understand why. Standing near the chandelier's blaze of light, roses heavy in the air, I felt the old cold flash through my chest again. Concrete, blood, heels walking away unhurried. It came and went in less than a second this time. Quieter than before. Like a wound finally scarring over rather than tearing fresh. I set my champagne down, steadied my breath, and kept my face as smooth as the marble under my heels. I should say something about what I felt, watching her world start to buckle. Not joy exactly, something colder, something closer to relief. The kind you feel when a wound you've carried for years finally starts to heal. Slow and ugly and necessary. There was still more to come. I hadn't even shown her the worst of it. A man I'd never met found me outside my studio 2 nights after that dinner. He leaned against a black sedan that smelled faintly of leather and cigar smoke. Dominic Reyes, in the flesh, looked nothing like the monster I'd built in my head. He looked like an accountant. Gray suit, quiet voice, hands folded like he was waiting for a bus. "You're the sister," he said. Not a question. "Stepsister," I said. "Someone's been feeding information to a lawyer named Grace Kim," he said. "I'd like to know who." "I wouldn't know anything about that," I said. I kept my voice as flat as his. He smiled, thin and humorless. The kind of smile that had nothing to do with warmth. "People who know nothing don't usually stand this still when I ask a question," he said. "I respect stillness. It usually means someone's hiding something worth finding. Or it means I have nothing to hide," I said. "Some of us just don't scare easily." He studied me a long moment, calculating. The way a man calculates odds he doesn't like. "I hope for your sake that's true," he said. "Things tend to happen to people who get in my way." "Ask around." "I have," I said. "That's rather the point." Something flickered behind his eyes. The first crack of uncertainty I'd seen in him. Gone as fast as it appeared. He got into his car without another word. Tires rolled slow over wet asphalt. Taillights shrank into the dark, like 2 red eyes closing. I stood on the sidewalk a long moment after he'd gone. Heart steady despite everything. Fear only works on people who still have something left to lose. Something they haven't already priced in. Reyes moved fast after that dinner, the way cornered men always do. Within a week, 2 of Julian's known associates were arrested. Unrelated fraud charges. Their names surfaced in a Business Journal exposé. Grace had quietly fed it to a reporter months earlier. Time to detonate the moment the wire transfers went public. The article didn't mention Julian by name. It didn't need to. Anyone reading closely could follow the thread straight to his door. Vivian showed up at my apartment unannounced, mascara running, roses long gone from her hair. She smelled like fear now more than perfume. Sharp and unfamiliar on her. "People are calling me," she said. "Reporters." Someone from the FBI left a card under our door. "Marlo, what is happening?" I let her stand in my doorway a moment before answering. "It sounds like your husband has some explaining to do." "Don't," she snapped. Some of the old cruelty flashed back through the fear. "Don't stand there acting like you don't care. You're my sister. Stepsister," I said quietly. "And you made that very clear. Every year since we were children." She flinched like I'd struck her. Maybe I had, in the only way that mattered anymore. She turned and walked away without another word. Heels clicking down the hallway, sharp and unhurried. The same rhythm that used to follow me into the dark. That sound didn't unsettle me this time. This time, I let myself smile. The final wave came on a Thursday, exactly the way I'd planned it 11 years earlier. The contract on Ray's shell company expired at midnight. Grace filed the lawsuit at 9 that morning, naming Julian, Ray's, and 3 offshore accounts, in a single sworn complaint. By noon, reporters had camped outside the penthouse lobby. I sat in the back of the courtroom that morning. The room smelled of old wood polish and recycled air. Fluorescent light buzzed faint overhead. Grace stood at the podium, voice steady. She laid out 11 years of documentation in 20 crisp minutes. The judge's gavel cracked once, sharp as a gunshot. It granted an emergency asset freeze before Ray's own lawyers had finished sitting down. Outside, on the courthouse steps, a reporter caught Grace on her way out. I recognized her from the Business Journal. "Is it true this case started with an anonymous tip, years before any laws were broken?" she asked. She thrust the microphone forward. "I can't discuss the origins of our evidence," Grace said, calm as still water. "I can tell you the documentation speaks for itself." It did. By early afternoon, 3 other outlets had picked up the story. Each one added a fresh thread. A whistleblower's ledger. A homicide connection. A fraud case with tendrils reaching into 2 other states. What had started as a single sworn complaint had become, within hours, an avalanche no one could slow down. I watched it unfold from my studio, phone buzzing with updates from Ruth every 20 minutes. Frozen assets. A federal raid scheduled for 6 that evening. A junior associate at Julian's firm, flipping for immunity. He handed over 3 years of ledgers he'd been too afraid to mention until now. Vivian called me at 2 in the afternoon. Her voice was hollow. Stripped of every trace of the girl who used to call me unlovable. "They took the car," she said. "They took the car this morning, Marlo, men with a court order." "I don't understand what's happening to my life." "It sounds like it's collapsing," I said. "Why do you sound like that?" she whispered. "Why do you sound like you already knew?" There it was. The question I'd been waiting 11 years to hear. "Because I did," I said. Silence stretched long enough that I could hear her breathing shift. Panic rising under it. "What does that mean?" she said. "What do you mean you knew?" "It means I introduced you to Julian on purpose," I said. "It means every account that froze because of paperwork. Paperwork I started building before you ever wore that ring. You did this," she said. Her voice cracked wide open. "You did this to me. You did this to yourself," I said. "I just made sure it happened faster than it would have on its own." "Why?" she said, voice breaking into something almost childlike. "Why would you spend 11 years hating me this much?" "I didn't spend 11 years hating you," I said. "I spent 11 years preparing for exactly this phone call. There's a difference, even if you'll never understand it." "You're a monster," she whispered. "Maybe," I said. But I'm a monster who kept receipts. She hung up without another word. I sat with the phone still warm in my hand, listening to the silence where her voice used to be. Something settled in my chest, something unsettled for 11 years. By 6 that evening, federal agents moved through the penthouse lobby in dark jackets. Cameras flashed from across the street. Julian was taken out in handcuffs, sandalwood cologne finally overwhelmed by sweat and fear. Vivian stood on the sidewalk in last season's dress. Mascara streaked, diamond ring already flagged as an asset subject to seizure. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. Smaller than the girl who used to iron her own blouses onto my chores. Smaller than the bride who'd walked down an aisle lined with roses 3 months earlier, believing she'd won. Her hair, once glossy and perfectly set, hung limp against her neck. Her mascara had run in 2 dark tracks down her cheeks. Catching the streetlight like cracks in porcelain, the diamond ring still caught light on her finger. The hand wearing it trembled now, fingers curling inward, like she wanted to hide it from the cameras. I noticed something else too, standing close enough across the street to catch it on the wind. She didn't smell like roses anymore. Fear had burned the perfume off her hours ago, replaced by sweat and smoke and the metallic tang of panic. The scent that used to announce her arrival in every room was simply gone. Its absence felt louder than its presence ever had. I stood across the street, close enough to watch. Far enough that she almost didn't see me. Almost. Our eyes met through the chaos. For one long second, she understood everything. The studio launch, the introduction, the frozen accounts, the reporter's article, all of it stitched together into a pattern. A pattern she'd been too greedy to notice while it was being woven. "Why?" she mouthed. No sound left in her voice. I didn't answer. Some questions don't deserve an answer. Only a silence loud enough to hear. She found a way to call me one final time, 3 weeks later. From a number I didn't recognize, voice raw from crying. "You have to help me," she said. "You have to tell them I didn't know anything." I didn't know what he was. "I can't tell them anything you didn't already sign your name to," I said. "You planned this," she said. Anger flooded back through the fear. "You've hated me since we were children. This is you finally getting even, isn't it? Admit it." "I stopped needing you to admit anything a long time ago," I said. "This isn't about even. This is about arithmetic. You took everything you could reach your whole life. Eventually something you reached for reached back. You could have warned me," she said, quieter now. Something almost like begging under the anger. "I did," I said. "Every time I let you win something too easily. You never once stopped to ask why." She didn't have an answer for that. For the first time in either of our lives, the silence on her end belonged to her alone. No one left to blame it on but herself. "I hope you're happy," she finally said. "I'm not happy," I said. "I'm finished." Those aren't the same thing. I hung up before she could say anything else. Some conversations only need to end once, to end for good. There was one more piece she never learned. I intended to keep it that way. Delia Marsh hadn't only given me Julian's financial history. She'd given me something else, tucked into a folder I hadn't opened until the lawsuit was already filed. Proof that Reyes had ordered a hit on a whistleblower 2 years earlier, a hit that had gone through Vivian's own name on a shared account, unknowingly laundering the payment for a service she never once questioned. She wasn't only married to a criminal. She was legally entangled in a murder. She would spend the next several years finding that out. One subpoena at a time, long after I'd stopped watching. That was the twist even I hadn't expected. Not when I first woke up 16 years old in that narrow bed. I had planned the fall. Reyes had built the noose himself, years before I ever arrived to tighten it. I never told Vivian I knew. I let her find out through Grace's filings instead. Printed on official letterhead, delivered by a process server. On a Tuesday morning, the same day of the week I'd once died on concrete, waiting for heels to stop clicking away from me. Ruth called me one last time that winter. Her voice was tired, in the satisfied way of someone finishing a long job well. "Reyes took a plea," she said. 22 years, No parole for the first 15. Julian's looking at a decade, maybe less if he keeps cooperating. And the man who called me, I said. The one with the ledger. Testifying under a different name, Ruth said. Protected. He got what he wanted. His brother's case is finally being reopened. I sat with that a moment. Some quiet weight settled instead of lifting. The particular stillness that comes after a debt is finally paid. Not the fireworks people always expect. Thank you, I said. For all of it. Don't thank me, Ruth said. You did the hard part years before you ever called me. I just filled in the paperwork. We didn't speak again after that. Not because anything had gone wrong. There was simply nothing left between us that needed saying. Some partnerships exist entirely to finish one specific job. They end, cleanly, the moment the job is done. 6 months later, I sat on the porch of a small house outside the city. Sunlight warm across my hands. The smell of cut grass and coffee drifting through an open window, no roses anywhere. No sandalwood cologne. No heels on marble floors. Vivian sent one letter from a facility upstate. Asking why I hadn't visited. Asking whether I still hated her. I read it once, folded it carefully, and set it in a drawer I never opened again. Some doors close on their own, and you let them. Warren called once, voice thin over the phone, asking if any of it could have been prevented. I told him the truth, as much of it as he could carry. She built the walls herself, I said. I only made sure she couldn't paint over the cracks. He didn't call again after that. Some conversations only need to happen once. Oscar came by most Sundays, bringing fresh bread that smelled like yeast and warm butter. Nothing like sandalwood, nothing like anything I'd ever needed to survive. He never asked about the years before he met me, and I never offered them. Somehow that silence felt like its own kind of trust. Rather than a wall between us. You're quieter than usual today, he said one Sunday. He set the bread on the counter. Good quiet, I said. The kind that comes after, not before. He nodded like that made sense, even though I never explained what it came after. Some people don't need every answer to know a person is finally settled. He was one of them. I was grateful for it, in a way I didn't have words for yet. Priya visited that autumn, bringing coffee in the same chipped mug she always used. She set it on my new porch railing, like it belonged there. You seem lighter, she said. She studied my face the way she used to study spreadsheets, looking for the number that didn't add up. I finally finished something, I said. 11 years in the making. She didn't ask what. She'd learned that some answers arrive on their own schedule, not hers. We sat in comfortable silence. Coffee steam curled into morning air that smelled like cut grass and nothing else. No roses anywhere close enough to reach me. I didn't forgive her. I didn't need to. I had simply finished what her cruelty started. In the only currency that ever mattered to either of us. Time. Patience. And the truth. Delivered exactly when it would do the most damage. The wind moved through the grass outside my window, warm and unhurried, carrying nothing but the smell of morning. For the first time since I died on that cold stretch of concrete, the silence around me finally belonged to no one but me. If you were me, would you have warned her? Or let the trap close exactly as it did? Tell me in the comments. Where are you watching from?